one of my reasons for not having kids is the pain of that family dysfunction and not having ever really experienced family as something that I wanted to recreate for myself. So yes, I have tons more freedom. I have more money. I'm able to invest a lot of in my, you know, personal interests, all those fabulous things that come with being child-free. But the reason I'm child-free is actually not that fabulous at all, you know, and I think that's the case for a lot of people. A lot of people are choosing not to have kids from a place of pain, from a place of self-preservation.
Ruby Warrington, welcome to Youre. How are you?
I'm not doing bad. It's really nice to be here. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Likewise. I feel like you're my sister from another mister. I'm very I'm so glad to have stumbled across your work, and I think it's while the conversation around people who don't want children is growing, I feel as though your unique perspective is one that is very needed. And so before we get into all of that, I was just wondering if you could tell me why you wrote Women Without Kids and what that book is, what it's supposed to represent.
Yeah, I mean, there are two sort of very distinct entry points for me into this subject, and this subject now, meaning at this time in my life, but also at this time kind of in the collective. All of my work has always been, well, in terms of my book, it's always come from a very personal place, not necessarily of like, this is the book that I needed, but this is a subject that I am ready to dive into really deeply. And if I can get a book deal, that kind of like pays me to do all the research I want to do, you know? So with this book, it was on reaching my kind of early into almost mid 40s and starting to look ahead to menopause, realizing that as somebody who'd always not wanted to be a mother and always been told that I would likely regret that, that it would feel like there was something missing, particularly as I got older. Looking ahead to menopause and actually really reckoning for the first time with my biological clock kind of stopping ticking, I realized I felt zero regret. There was absolutely nothing missing in my life. I felt incredibly fulfilled and incredibly grateful to have been able to pursue so many things other than motherhood that have been deeply fulfilling to me. And I realized that having spent my 20s and 30s really questioning my own sort of inner knowing around this subject and being questioned by people directly, but also just by society at large, you know, why don't you want to be a mum? Why don't you want to do this thing which is fundamental to being a woman? People weren't bold enough to say to me, what's wrong with you? It was implied, but I asked it of myself.
I'm South Asian, so, you know,
right, okay.
Different. Family members are different.
Directly. Right. Right. So anyway, it was a revelation to sort of be reaching, the end of my reproductive years and to say, well, you know what? I was right all along. I'm not unfulfilled. I don't regret it. This was exactly the right path for me. And I think that also everybody else kind of stopping asking. I think beyond after I turned 40, the external noise really died down. People just kind of got bored of asking, I suppose, and were just happy to let me do my own sort of weird thing. But everybody else's voices ebbing away gave me clarity, the clarity that I needed to really start to dial into my own feelings about this, you know? And so that was my personal perspective. Within that realization, I sort of wanted to offer something back to younger women who were maybe engaged in that inner questioning or getting that external questioning. But then from my sort of journalistic perspective, I kind of zoomed out and looked at the fact that, well, the birth rate is declining steadily and steeply all around the world. You know, in every country in the world, the number of children that women are having is decreasing. And so I think there's a lot of scaremongering around that, particularly
we oscillate, don't we, between like different scaremongering.
Well, too many people or not enough people.
Yeah, exactly. I remember there being a time where we felt like we were overpopulated and there weren't enough resources. In fact, I mean, well, that's still a big part of
that's still a big part of the environmental question. But then if you turn to like politicians and economists and demographers will say we have a looming population collapse.
Yeah, because who are we going to put in the jails?
Not going to survive. Right. Well, I mean, we can totally get into all of that. I'm feeling quite fired up about that because there's a documentary coming out that gives a very kind of like scaremongering, patriarchal kind of take on the falling birth rate. Anyway, I was looking at this and thinking, well, you see all these graphs with this big, I'm doing this on the screen, like with this plummeting birth rate. And I'm like, that graph is mapping millions and millions and millions of women's individual, very personal, often very fraught decisions about whether to have children, how many children to have, at what point in their lives to have children. And I'm like, why are we not talking about this? Why are we not talking about this in a way that goes beyond the really kind of surface, just sort of very prejudiced, very cliche sort of ways of talking about it? I just felt it was really time for not only me, but us collectively to really get under the skin of what's happening with women without kids.
And it feels like, because look, there's this kind of growing thing that's happening on TikTok at the moment and Instagram Reels, where we're seeing people who've decided not to have children sort of gleefully mocking those who do. And I've always been someone who's like, I don't want children. I don't like children. I know where I stand. I plan on being selfish until I die. And when I'm old, I'd like a trained nurse to insert my catheter rather than someone that I brought into the world who probably did about as well at school as I did. So I'm definitely someone who feels like very staunch about my decision, and I understand this like kind of like underlying defensiveness in people who don't want children, because we are like bombarded with questions and prodding and shaming and fear mongering about regret. But I don't love twisting that around to, oh, I get up at 10 a.m. and then I have wine. And then I have that, like, I've just seen about 100 of these videos in the last like few weeks. I think because I've clicked on one, I've entered like fuck parents TikTok. And I don't think that's cool. And I don't think that's your angle. It's not my angle at all. It's like, no, I'm just making personal. I'm not mocking your choice. Your choice is fucking amazing for you. But this growing like spitefulness is not how to have the conversation in a helpful way, and it doesn't make you come across as like, I don't know, super. Doesn't
it's just
matter.
not cool. It's not cool, and it's not kind, and it's massively disrespectful to parents who are struggling, and by the way, having a really hard time.
Yeah, and also like who didn't plan on shit being this hard. Right. They didn't. Yes. No one signed up for how hard this has now become. Exactly. Like if we look at reasons that people are deciding to have children is declining, of course a massive part of that is a growing independence of women, is women not wanting to be tied down, as women want to pursue their own choices or have agency over their time or their bodies or their freedom. But also it's because having a child is fucking unaffordable now for a lot of people. Like school is unaffordable, formula is unavailable at times, fucking baby formula is unavailable at times. Like it's a growing, there are safety concerns for people depending on where they live in the world. Like there are people who aren't very well, there's shit in our food that is fucking with women's hormones. Like there are a multitude of reasons, and for the only response from those who wish for us to repopulate the earth to be like, well, we've just got to trap them into pregnancy and force them to have babies, and if they want to get abortions, if we catch them having an abortion, or if we think they had an abortion or aided their miscarriage, we're going to give them the death penalty, which is being introduced in certain states in America. They're trying to get that passed currently, to terrify women into maintaining pregnancies, because in their head then women will have to stay with their partner, and then we'll bring back the like all American family. It's not just America, by the way, it's like a rise in fascism growing all over Europe as well, and many countries in the world. But rather than just going, what are we as politicians fucking up in our society that potentially could be putting off parents, people who would actually quite like to be parents, who would like to experience that, who do want to have that as part of their journey. We aren't doing anything in America to support people. There's no fucking childcare. Like you and I are English, we've moved over here. It's a fucking shock. Like the mortality rate is terrifying. So it's just like, there's a lot of reasons why a lot of people don't feel totally equipped, and like you're very lucky and privileged if you're able to make that work, but a lot of people aren't, and our politicians should be fixing the society that makes it easier and more appealing to have children if people want to, and then leave the fucking rest of us alone. But we don't have to turn this into a war of otherhood and versus motherhood, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, I went off on a rant, but
no, totally, that was a fantastic rant.
Your book is
and
like,
I hope that you're feeling inspired after reading my book to rant like that, because that's all the stuff I get into.
Exactly, and I feel as though your book is as much for mothers as it is for people who don't want to be mothers, right? You talk about these misconceptions of how naturally all motherhood is supposed to come to all mothers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think that's really beautiful and important. It makes a lot of women who I know are having babies right now feel way less gaslit.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Gaslighting, that thing. Motherhood is every woman's biological imperative and therefore will come naturally to her, is just so damaging, because motherhood under patriarchy and under some of the conditions that you just sort of described is actually, it's very challenging. And so even somebody with the strongest sign of natural maternal instinct, which is not necessarily, by the way, only applicable to women, some people, regardless of their biological sex or gender, just have a different capacity for caregiving, right? And that's just kind of down to personality and all sorts of other
how
factors
they were raised,
too.
yeah.
How they were raised, exactly, the kind of things they value, what lights them up, etc., etc. But yes, that what you're sort of getting into is what I call the mommy binary, which has been this very binary idea where we've had kind of mothers are natural, are fulfilling their rightful duty, or are fulfilling themselves on a sort of a deeply sort of spiritual level almost. And then women who don't have kids are unnatural, deluded, selfish, immature, etc. And so I can see how that, having been the sort of rhetoric around it for so long, that instinct to kind of like push back and sort of make out that, you know, choosing not to have children is this very empowered sort of fabulous lifestyle choice. I can sort of see where that instinct comes from, but it's always really turned me off, and I've just always found it really like distasteful. It's just kind of like,
well, yeah,
actually, and it's very harmful in all kinds of ways. You know, it's also suggesting that, I mean, I state quite clearly at the beginning of the book, this is not a book about how to have a fabulous child-free life. First and foremost, I'm not by any means trying to set out that not having children is preferable to having children. I'm just sort of trying to say that this is as valid, it's a different and as equally valid path as motherhood, if it's what is right for you. And the reason it's right for you could be down to all sorts of different factors. And then beyond that, I think that I was kind of, I put in a note to one of my editors during the writing process, you know, having a fabulous life is not about lions and trips abroad and 5-star hotels and shoes, right?
No.
It's only possible to have a fabulous life when you've really been prepared to sort of do the work, all the stuff that makes you feel like shit. And in the realm of mothering and motherhood, that shit can get really, really heavy. Like, once something I really did identify when I started to really feel into what had always been what I term affirmative no about having kids, was just that I had there's a lot of family dysfunction that I lived through and carry in my body, and just didn't want to repeat. Like, my experience of family was not this sort of warm, cozy, kind of fuzzy, sentimental thing. Family has always been quite fraught for me. Like, my parents are very, very loving, but they were quite challenged in their parenting for a multitude of different reasons. I had sort of experiences during my teens that they weren't really able to help me with, that were very damaging to me, and all of which I go into in the book. But one of my reasons for not having kids is the pain of that family dysfunction, and not having ever really experienced family as something that I wanted to recreate for myself. So yes, I have tons more freedom. I have more money. I'm able to invest a lot in my, you know, personal interests, all those fabulous things that come with being child-free. But the reason I'm child-free is actually not that fabulous at all, you know? And I think that's the case for a lot of people. A lot of people are choosing not to have kids from a place of pain, from a place of self-preservation in many ways, you know?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I want to get back to mothers, right, for a second, but like,
sorry,
before we do, no, it's okay. But for me, it's that I've been looking after people my whole life. Like, since I was about 8 or 9, I've been looking after very, very physically and mentally ill people, adults. And so I feel like I feel like I do have a really maternal side, but I've done it. I feel like I've mothered and I've raised people, even if they were older than me, and now they're okay. And now I feel like my kids have gone off to uni, basically. And it's like, I've done my bit, everyone's still alive, they're happier than they were before, I fucking nailed it, and now I'm fucking knackered. So I feel like I'm in retirement from motherhood. Like I've been caring for my friends. I go above and beyond for the people in my life. I live with all these fucking men who I can't stop looking after, you know, and I love to, because they're my friends, and women and all kinds of different people. But I have a lot of love to give. I just feel like the obligatory part of like where you can't take the day off, I've done that already. I've done that. Like there's been nothing selfish about my life up until now. And so I totally get motherhood. Like I'm watching all my mates have babies at the moment, and like some of them are like, I've watched them open up in ways that are just unbelievable, and some of them have taken to it like a duck to water, and others are really fucking struggling. And what I was trying to get at earlier with you is that like it's so important to be able to have the conversation of the fact that actually it is a massive fucking decision, and it can be quite derailing in exciting and less exciting ways, and it's not always something that comes naturally to everyone, and that's fucking okay. And that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't have had kids, or you shouldn't have kids, or you can't learn, but it just means that it's not going to be this fucking Disney movie for everyone, and we have to create space. It's almost like they're so afraid that if we find out it's going to be really challenging, we'll stop having babies, right? That's what I think the fear is, which is why we bombard people with the fairy tale idea of the perfect motherhood. And I think that that's incredibly damning to the people I know who are capable, wonderful. There's nothing I can think of that was incredibly fulfilling, that wasn't unbelievably hard to nail. And motherhood is absolutely one of those things, because you are balancing so many things that are changing so fast all at the same time, while you are changing at the same time. And so what I feel like your book does is also pay respect to that journey of mothers, and in liberating those who don't want to do it, you are also trying to liberate those who do from feeling this burden to be motherfucking nature.
Right. Literally. Exactly. Yes. So it's been really fantastic actually that I've kind of, among my early readers, so many people are mums, and they're expressing huge gratitude for helping them feel less like they're fucking it up, less like they're failing, for giving them permission to sometimes not enjoy being a mother, to ask questions. Was this the right thing for me? To wonder, or really kind of feel into the conditioning that might have propelled their decisions around motherhood. You know, my one dear friend who had twins after sort of 3 or 4 rounds of IVF, and it was very traumatic for her. And she loves being a mum, and has also been blindsided by how incredibly challenging it is. She texted me the other day. She was like, oh my God, did I want babies? Or did I think I wanted babies because of all the conditioning, you know? It's just like,
well, it swings in roundabouts, by the way, which I do with my own career. I'm like, do I want to do this? I've sacrificed like a lot of my freedom, and I don't have a normal life, and I don't get to have like normal friendships, and I get whisked off for 8 months, which I know sounds incredibly glamorous, and I'm so fucking lucky, and I'm so fucking grateful, but I also like don't get to see the person of my life for like months at a time, don't get to see my dogs, spend a time completely on my own in a country where I don't know anyone, and I'm working like 16 hours a day with terrible health, and I go through periods myself of being like, why did I not just fucking work somewhere where I could sit down and then go home at 5
But this is it. You sound like a mum who had
exactly,
you know, a really hard time having a child, who then is feeling like she has to give the caveat before she expresses how hard it is. That, and of course I'm so grateful, and of course I'm so lucky that I was able to do this. It's like sometimes it's really okay for really fabulous things.
No, really I know. It's just that comparing motherhood to being a famous actress is like a whole other fucking thing. Like, but I'm just saying that like but what I'm saying is that, but I also, some days I love it so much and I can't believe it, and I have the best fucking time, and I'm so fulfilled, and I'm so ready for it, and I just like, we as human beings are allowed in every other area of our life to oscillate between, people have it in marriage, they have it in friendships of like regret and get away from me, or I love you so much I could fucking breathe you in. Like, it is completely normal. And yet in motherhood, like there is not that space for people to have reasonable moments of doubt.
Right, exactly. So what you described before is that we have this incredibly sort of saccharine, sort of sentimental idea of this Disney movie of what motherhood is going to be. And I've been reflecting a lot on how sentimentalizing things like that is almost like a protection mechanism. You know, like you pointed out, I mean, motherhood is sentimentalized by the forces, the powers that be, in order to corral women into motherhood. And for the same reason, you know, non-motherhood is made deviant and made the other and made suspect for that same reason, to help corral people into becoming mothers and therefore fulfilling their kind of like their role within the patriarchy. But I was also thinking that up until relatively recently, like, women needed motherhood to be sentimentalized in a way because there was no other option, or at least options were very much closed off to the majority of women. You know, the doors weren't open to other life paths until relatively recently.
Well, talk to me about sexual evolution, because that ties into a lot of this.
Yes, indeed. So that chapter was the hardest to write. There's a chapter called Sexual Evolution, where I start with the hypothesis that women without kids, particularly heterosexual women without kids, are the sort of walking embodiment of the fact that sex and female sexuality has other functions besides procreation. And I've actually kind of evolved my thinking. My thinking about this is still evolving, because it was like such a complex subject to dive into in like a 7,000 word chapter in a book. But I was even thinking about the fact that, you know, women can get pregnant for literally about 48 hours a month during the time that we're actually, you know, during our menstrual years, compared to men who can get somebody pregnant like 24 hours a day, like pretty much for their whole kind of adult life, you know? So this would suggest that actually female sexuality, especially if you then add in the fact that a majority of women actually don't orgasm from penetration, like sex is, you know, more satisfying, more pleasurable. If the argument, you know, the very sort of fundamentalist religious argument is that sex feels good in order to get us to procreate, the fact that women can have clitoral orgasms, that a lot of women don't orgasm from penetration, sort of like shows that female sexuality especially is not just for procreation, like it has other purposes, you know. And that, I think, is a conversation it's sort of ripe to be expanded, and it definitely is something that has been spoken about over the past sort of 40, 50 years with the sex positivity movement, etc., as part of the kind of sexual revolution. Samanthaism.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sex in the City. Yeah.
Exactly. So Samantha was kind of like a walking embodiment of this attitude, I suppose. But yeah, I just think it's really, that conversation is sort of bubbling up again and ready to be spoken about again.
And so do you think that there is a tie-in with those who abuse religion in order to legislate against a woman's right to just freely be allowed to have sex without having to sign up for eternal motherhood?
Right. Well, I mean,
do you think that there is do you think that there is a threat from the idea that there is a growing understanding that sex for women can just be about pleasure and freedom and multiple different partners and not feeling a need to be tied down to one individual?
I think if you look at let's say the ideologies that benefit from women's sexuality being ring-fenced as for motherhood, we are talking about, fundamentalist organized sort of religions where essentially we want to ensure that more people are being born who are being born into these very kind of specific familial structures that have been, you know, put in place in order to ensure the continuation of our belief systems, of our ideologies, etc., etc. So there's organized religion, and then there's sort of patriarchy as a kind of tangential offshoot type thing from that, right? And then capitalism as well, honestly, because the more people who are born, the more cheap labor we have. Like the more people there are available for employment, the lower wages can be offered. People have less bargaining power. The more of us there are, like the cheaper life is, the cheaper labor is, basically. And so, it pays for corporations and corporate interests for there to be more and more people being born onto the planet, which is why you have someone like Elon Musk, who's a very kind of pro-natalist, very scaremongering messaging around, the falling birth rates, while at the same time he amasses like hundreds and hundreds of billions of personal wealth. Women are selfish not to be having children, but
he hasn't been known for he hasn't been known to like, I can't imagine he's a super hands-on father. Like, I don't feel like he's wearing the fake tits that've got the milk in them and breastfeeding the child. Like, but also he was, at least for a very long time, I'm not quite sure on the update, but quite anti-union and anti the ability
anti the workers,
workers to strike for their rights, etc. And so the two, I do see what you mean by going hand in hand. I mean, that's getting back to the abortion thing. There are a lot of theories about the fact that the reason that these things are happening first and foremost in places that have the most people of color in the United States specifically is that they want those people to be destabilized, so that we will have more people having to take desperate measures in order to survive. And then those people are more likely to end up within the justice system. And then boom, once you're in the justice system, you are able to work for something like 13 cents an hour.
Right.
And so our trainers and T-shirts are being made by people who are effectively in slave labor, because they were born into circumstances that they did not choose.
Right, exactly. Yes, I mean, I hadn't actually heard that theory, but yes, that sort of ties into what I'm saying. This idea of like more people equals cheap labor. When people talk about, the dangers to the economy of an aging population, the economy as it stands currently is what they're talking about. The dangers to corporate profit making machines, basically. There are ways that the economy could be remade to support an aging population and to redistribute wealth in fairer ways that help mothers, that help children, that help old people, But at the moment, are you familiar with Jaron Lanier?
No,
he's like a futurist. I think he was quite involved in kind of like making the internet, and he's since come out as being quite anti-internet. He's one of those people who
always the way, isn't it? It's everyone who started Facebook now comes out saying that they don't let their children use Facebook.
I think he was very early in one of the big tech kind of giants. Anyway, there's a quote from him in the book, and he's like, "The economy only works now if you were young, healthy, and childless." Which is pretty, I mean, it boils it really down, but yeah, and I'm not an economist, so I don't take anything I'm saying as kind of like the final word on all of this. Do your own research. But yeah, when we look at just the bare bones of the fact that a lot of people who are choosing, and I'm putting in air quotes, choosing not to have children, are making that choice based on how difficult it is to square their desire to live a comfortable life financially and have children. That's becoming increasingly difficult for a larger sort of margin of the population, let alone people who are already existing in poverty or below poverty conditions, being forced to reproduce.
Yeah, and being denied access to the healthcare that it would take to make that manageable or even safe.
Exactly.
Talk to me about regrets. That's something you cover beautifully in your book. And the fact that, as you pointed out at the beginning of this chat, like, you have reached this point in your life where you can look back, and the biological ability to have children of your own is like closing, and you look back and you have no regrets. My door has not yet closed, but I already have no regrets, and I'm getting past the age at which I should have frozen my eggs, and I've deliberately chosen not to, because I just don't want to put myself through that, given that I know how much I feel about it. And also, if I change my mind, I can always adopt later. No, I would like to talk to you a bit more in depth about the no regrets, because I think I've spoken about this on this podcast before, but a friend of mine once said that if she gets to the end of her life and she looks back and she goes, fuck, I should have had children, she was like, then only she has to live with the consequences of that choice. She's like, whereas if she has children, even though she doesn't want them, then the potential of her looking back with regret means that she didn't just negatively impact her own life, but also potentially the lives of her progeny, you know, a lot of those who come after her, and then the people who come after them, and you know, you and I are familiar with how childhood damage can really like impact the lineage. And I thought that was such an amazing way of putting it, because also it's just not realistic to say nobody will ever have a regret about anything. It's just more to say that it breaks down for me that a way to weigh up that regret. And I personally choose the one in which only I suffer rather than anyone else.
I love that. That is such a brilliant quote, perspective. I'll be taking that on board and probably sharing that elsewhere. Jameela's friend once said. But yeah, so this regret thing, when I shared at the beginning, I had no regrets. I want to acknowledge that's very specific to me. And for me, that was validation that yes, my intuition around this being right for me was correct. You know, it was validation. So there's a book that I reference throughout Women Without Kids, and it's called Regretting Motherhood. And it reports the study, the findings from a study conducted by an Israeli sociologist called Orna Donat, where she interviewed, I think, like 25 women. Some of them had become grandmothers by this point, who openly regretted motherhood. They regretted having had children. And it's just fascinating reading. Finding this book was just like the missing piece. Because actually, of course, you sort of touched on, I think it's impossible to make any decision without some sort of, not even some degree of regret, but like there's no way to go through life without having any regrets. And given the nature of this decision, which is like literally one of the only decisions that you can't reverse, the thought that nobody ever regrets making that decision is just completely unrealistic. And reading it is also incredibly edgy, because this is one of the biggest taboos, I think. I did some more research around it, and statistics show that between 7 and 14% of parents say that they regret having children, which is actually quite a high number, and possibly even underreported, given what a taboo subject this is.
There's a stigma around it.
Such a stigma, but then that regret can be fleeting. I think it's possible to feel regret for a day, and then the next day feel like mad love and like, just how could I live not having done this, you know?
But also that regret can also be a product of the fact that we don't talk clearly enough about how to make that decision, right?
Right.
So we tell people like, oh, the baby will bring the couple that isn't working currently, when they don't have the stress of a child, together and make them closer, the kind of concept of the BandAid baby. What work like this does in stipulating how hard motherhood is not, from what I take from it, to discourage people from motherhood. It is to say, make that fucking decision, if you're going to, so fucking carefully. Like, do not think that it's going to be seamless and it's going to bring you necessarily always closer to your partner. If you have issues beforehand, get them fucking sorted out before you bring that other person into the world. Like with any of my friends who get pregnant, like one of the first things I do, especially if there are any kind of like issues in the relationship that I'm privy to, I'm like, you have to go to therapy and couples therapy now, because once that baby arrives, it's going to be, you're not going to have that space to fall apart that you need to. And so, you know, I think it's a really important reminder it's an imperative reminder that, like, set yourself up. Your life doesn't have to be perfect, and a lot of people make fucking do and have amazing experiences of parenthood with not very much. But emotionally, I think that's a huge, obviously financially that's important, but emotionally that is non-negotiable. That given that you and I were raised in situations where not everyone who raised us was emotionally ready to be able to raise a child, I urge anyone considering it to not feel like it's an impossible task, but that it is vital for your happiness and for the best results possible for your offspring and for your family, to ready yourself and not do it with the wrong person if you can possibly avoid it, or not do it because you think that'll fix what's going on. Fix what's going on first. You doing it alone is difficult, but it's also incredibly possible, and a lot of my friends are doing that, and they're just making sure they have the right support system with friends or family around them, or they have a job that is understanding around those things. It's just urging people to take it so much more fucking seriously than anyone necessarily reminds us to.
Right.
And we don't sell these same things to men. We just tell the amount of men who try to convince me to have a child because they think that my boyfriend is like a very impressive musician, and they just feel like, you know, his legacy needs to be carried on, and that's my responsibility. And I'm like, I don't, that's really none of my business, right? And I don't give a
It's really
shit
none
about
of their business, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, and he
Yeah.
can, you know, and I've said to him, I was like, if you ever feel the need to have a baby, you can have a baby with someone else and either be with that person or not be with that person. And then I'll be, you know, here and I'll be fun on the weekends. But I was like, I don't ever want to stop you from having a baby, but I won't be the person doing that. And these men, it was one of the most famous producers in the world who said it to me, and I won't name him because it was so weird what he did. But he was just like, no, it's fine. You know, like I've got 6 children.
Oh.
And I'm still able to have my career. You'll still be able to have your career. You'll still have your freedom. It's like, mate, I see you in the recording studios all day, every day. There are no children in that recording studio. Your wife is doing the majority of that care work, of that care. And so this is another like ridiculous fallacy that like, it'll be fine, it'll be easy. Like, men of all people should not be saying that to us. Life does change, and it changes in brilliant ways, but also changes in ways that do, of course, take things away from you. And I couldn't fucking believe that this man was standing there trying to pressure me at a fucking party to have, in his head, my boyfriend's baby, not even my baby.
Right. Not even
like
for you or for your fulfillment.
Yeah. With legacy is so weird.
Yeah.
Like, I personally don't care about legacy, right? I don't plan on being remembered, which is why I'm so weird on the internet. Because I don't really care if anyone, like, I don't need a statue built of me later, or for anyone to think of me once I'm gone, because I won't know, because I'll be gone. So that's not a factor that I have. I don't want to see a small version of me. I don't have any of those particular urges. But I just remember finding that so prevalent, like, from men. I got so many men like trying to pressure me into doing it and telling me that I'm being selfish. This man at one point, it was like 1 a.m, tried to make me pinky promise that I would never have an abortion. I would never abort a baby if I ever got pregnant with James's child. And I was like, no. And then James just wanted to get away from him, and he leaned in and just whispered in my ear, it's not legally binding. You can just pinky promise so I can go home. He was like, I'm not going to hold you to it. I don't give a shit. I don't want children either.
Yeah, but you will know that you did it.
Just out of
Do you know what
principle.
I mean? It's like, yeah,
principle. I just fucking stood there for half an hour until this man just got drunker and drunker and finally left.
But God.
But yeah, I just can't believe how many of those types of conversations I've had. Like, no regard as to like what I want, what I'm ready for. Like, I'm incredibly sick. That's a massive part of why I don't want children. Not to say that sick people shouldn't have children, but like, I'm not very well. I can just about fucking keep myself together. I don't want to, I literally can't give someone enough because I'm sick. I'm like, that's okay to say. And that doesn't mean that's the only reason someone else shouldn't have it. Like, someone shouldn't want a baby or whatever. It's like, if you're well enough, therefore, then you should be a mother. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. But there's just a multitude of reasons someone doesn't want to do it. Like, leave us alone. Don't make us have to explain ourselves. It's ridiculous at a party. It is wild how casual the conversation continues to be.
Which just proves, it just shines the light on how normalized motherhood is, and how normalized it is for other people, in particular men, to assume ownership, entitlement to women's bodies as the technologies of reproduction. You know, it's just so normalized. So as much as I'm sorry that you experienced that, which I see actually as a form of harassment, not to even laugh about that, it's harassment, but that level of entitlement to even have an opinion about it is just so indicative of like how ingrained it is in our society that that's what women's bodies are for, you know, what female bodies are for. There's a few things I really want to reflect on. I don't want to forget this. You were asking about regret, and one thing that Orna Donut said to me when I spoke to her about it, she described that thing, oh, but you will regret it. You sure you won't regret it? She described it as a politicized use of emotion, which I think it was really interesting way of phrasing it, because I just think politicized use of emotion, it means it's incredibly manipulative and it's incredibly coercive. And whether it's intentional or not, and when I say intentional, I mean conscious or not, that statement or that sentiment, you will regret it, is designed to coerce you into
it's designed
back
to evoke
into this
fear.
kind of role. Exactly. It's designed to invoke fear and sort of therefore get you to do the thing that person wants you to do.
Yeah, and fear is now at the heart of politics. Like
Absolutely.
fear is the leading tool of politics. It used to be inspiration. It used to, like in America, it was the American dream. It was people being together. It was the land of the free and the brave. Like now it is very much so like the immigrants are coming in.
Well, I feel like fear
everyone's becoming trans, or like everyone's regretting their abortions, and it's just like, it's bonkers.
Fear comes in when the masses start to rebel, when rebellion and uprising starts to kind of reach a tipping point where the people who are supposed to be disempowered actually start to get some power, is when fear kicks in and the fear messaging kicks in. And I think that's exactly what we've seen with the Roe v. Wade and with so much of, you know, what you just described. But yeah, that idea of kind of regret being a politicized emotion, I think is really interesting. But I love the way this is so progressive, and I fucking love it. And these are exactly the kind of conversations that I want this book to spark. You're like, you know what, if James does decide to have a baby, he could have a baby with someone else, and maybe I'd be part of their life, and maybe he'd be in a relationship with her, but maybe not. Maybe I'd be like the weekend girlfriend. I mean, fucking brilliant. That's just another way to think about forming family, right? And just thinking about, well, if we do want to have children, then how do we make it work? And just being really open-minded about like what that configuration and what that family situation could kind of look like. I think it's brilliant that you just gave us a little vision there for how that could be. You know?
Yeah, but like it just doesn't bother me. Like I live with all my mates and my boyfriend at the same time, and I'm almost 40. Like I already live in like a commune style home. And I remember at one point when James wasn't sure if he wanted kids or not. He's now decided he doesn't after how stressful it was to have a dog.
But good. Aiding the decision-making process.
Yeah, and I had nothing to do with it. But at one point, a friend of mine was looking to have a baby on her own, and she's still on that journey. And she was looking for sperm, and James kind of wanted to be a dad, wasn't ready for the full responsibility of that. And I definitely didn't want children. I was like, you should have a baby with her. I was like, she's fantastic. I was like, she did so many drugs when she was younger, and she still looks 12, and she's in perfect health, and she didn't get COVID one time in 3 years. I was like, she's a fucking
She's
Viking.
Obviously got some good genes. Like,
yeah, she's got insane genes. Like, she's brilliant. She's got an amazing personality. Your kid would have an amazing personality. It'd be the combination of the two of you. Like, he's got like, you know, they're just both like such wonderful people. And I was like, they would have an amazing kid together if they wanted to. And we had this like little bit of extra land that we could like build like a little like mini house onto. And I was like, she could just live there, and then like we'd all live together, and then my mate would be. And I'm not naive to think that couldn't create any kind of like weird political dynamic, but I really don't feel like it would, because I want nothing. I would never be jealous of that situation. I don't want anything to do with it, but I don't want to deny anyone that. And I want everyone to have something. I was like, I love the idea of her like raising a kid with all of us, and we can all help, and then she's a bit more supported than she would be on her own, like on the other side of the world from me. Like it just felt like we have to like break out of these narratives of like one way to do it. Like it takes a fucking village. It takes
Especially
a fucking village.
In this climate, yes, exactly.
Yeah, and so like build the motherfucking village if you have to, and that village is allowed to be weird. And so it's something that I maintain open about if he changes his mind when he gets older, because he's a bit younger than me. But like, I don't have any rule book here other than myself. You talk about that. It's like your decision impacts no one other than you. My decision doesn't have to negatively impact anyone else. It's my personal decision. I'm not getting in anyone's way. And I'm down to clown. I'm down to like do this the weirdest possible fucking way. I'm down to be a weird auntie. You know,
I think the world needs more weird aunties. Basically, I feel like weird aunties have been kind of like missing. We've been sort of erased in a way. I feel like there were probably historically always weird aunties, and weird aunties were like a necessary part of the support system for mothers, you know.
We didn't used to have IVF. We didn't used to have like not everyone was able to have a fucking baby, you know, before.
Right,
people still
exactly.
aren't.
There have throughout history been women without kids, right? And they've always kind of had their roles. And then I suppose as this sort of really strict patriarchal order took hold, those women without kids were more and more ostracized and sort of painted as weirder and weirder and weirder, and to ensure that as many women as possible were kind of like fulfilling that duty.
Because no one wants to be othered, and this,
right.
and like the idea is painted that you're alone, but actually like more and more that's not the case. And I find myself like now more on call than I've ever been before, because all my friends are having kids, and that's why I don't like the divide of like, fuck you mothers, that's happening. I can understand how it's happened, because you ostracize and demonize people for decades, they become defensive, but I don't want to be the ringleader of that fucking group. Like, that's not what I'm here for. Like, I don't want there to be a battle between us, because we're on the same side and we're here to help each other.
Exactly. This is why I talk about a concept that I termed the motherhood spectrum, which is basically like, instead of this kind of like, you've got natural, valid, legitimate mothers and unnatural, weird, like freakish non-mothers, actually every individual's aptitude and desire for parenthood exists on a spectrum. You know, a spectrum that is influenced by so many different factors that could change where a person orients on that spectrum at different points in their life, you know. And so this idea that, I don't know, some people are destined to be mothers and some people are destined to be these kind of non-mother outcasts, it's just ridiculous. It doesn't reflect our humanity at all.
Well, because I'm not very good at connecting with babies, what I have chosen to do with all my mates is like, I'm not going to be their godmother, but I will be yours. So I've become like a fairy godmother to my mates who are having the babies. And I'm like, I'm here to come in and bring shit for you. And on your baby's birthday, I'm going to buy you a fucking massage and a dildo and like all the brilliant things that you're going to need. Like, I still want to mother. I just want to mother adults, because then we can, you know, like, and I can't
adults
break
need
them.
mothering as well. I mean, I was having like, sometimes we all need to be a baby. I was having a conversation with someone. I help people write their books in my day job. And one of my clients, we were talking about this one part of her book, and we just kind of landed on this thing that like, actually part of us is always still a baby. Like, part of us always needs a nap. You know what I mean? It's like, we still have these kind of like, we all need to be mothered still. And I think that's something that I'm seeing among people, younger generations who are more open about, or more well-versed around mental health, which you do such a brilliant job of kind of like bringing into the consciousness, and have done a really good job of sort of bringing into the mainstream in a way. But I think this idea of reparenting and like parenting ourselves has become very popular. And I think a lot of people are realizing that, maybe they didn't get like all of the parenting that they needed from their designated primary caregivers, and that perhaps some mothering of the self is necessary before they even think about becoming a mother themselves. And a bit of mothering, not mothering, but you know what I mean? Like a bit of providing that maternal energy to each other. Like, if I have my own family, I'm not going to have the time or the fucking energy to go and help any of my mates out. It serves all of us if some of us are available as, you know, stand-ins, you know, and backup. I have like a bat signal that my mates have, and they can shine it in the sky, and I'm available because I freed myself up. Is it like a pizza box?
So it's like, exactly. It's a pizza box and a dildo. It's like a flying cock in the sky. And I turn up with like gifts and tissues and a shoulder to cry on. And like, I wear a very soft jumper, so I'm really good to hug. Really huggable. Yeah, exactly. Like weed, like whatever you need, like I'm there to provide it. And I think it's so good if we work in tandem with each other to like be like, I do have a bit of love to give. It just like, I can just, I'll be there to support you when you do the thing that's a bit too hard for me to do.
And this is reminding me of such a validating conversation that I had when I was researching this book, because I am really shit with babies. Like, put me in the same room as a baby and I literally freeze up. I just turn into a completely incompetent kind of like jelly. I'm like, what do I do? Does not compute. Like, I've got no idea how to interact with babies. And, you know, a psychologist will probably have lots to say about that, but also it's kind of just how I am. But I've always felt when I've heard people talk about, oh, well, that's like, you know, you're not a mum, but you can like help mums in their mothering. I've always kind of been a bit like, no shit, I probably can't actually, because I've literally never changed a nappy in my life. I'm going to be 47. I've never changed a nappy. I probably never will. Sorry, diaper to all the Americans who are listening. But but I'm just not that person. I'm not going to be your babysitter. Like, I'm just not. You wouldn't want me babysitting your kid, because I would literally be a gibbering mess in the corner, not knowing what to do with myself.
I'll pay for your babysitter, and
But
I'll take you out for the night of your life.
This conversation I had with someone, I didn't even bring this up with her. She just started talking about how she's like, I really value my non-mum friends, because honestly, it would be completely impractical of me to ask them to help me with the day-to-day, like, childcare stuff. It's so specific and so intuitive and so, like, you know, minute by minute, like, I can't delegate that. But what I do need is people to hang out with, where I can forget that I'm a mum, that I can go on a hike, I can talk about politics, I can talk about work, I can talk about everything except being a mum. She's like, please be that friend for me. And I was like, fuck yes, finally, I have my role. Yes, I can so be that friend. And it made me reflect on how, without even letting me know that was what was happening, or maybe not even being conscious of it on their part, I've got friends who've got kids that I've never met, which is just so indicative of the fact that these people obviously valued having me in that role in their life, someone they could escape from motherhood with, you know. So I'm really happy to be that escape hatch from motherhood for my mum friends.
And so what would you say, as we, you know, bring this to a close, just like some of your favorite takeaways from your book, like the takeaways that you feel like have been most responded to?
There's a couple. The one that I really came away from the book personally with was just how important my female friendships are to me, and how important it is to invest in my female friendships, especially, and not take them for granted. I think this came out of really thinking about,
how does that relate?
The question, one of the things that you might have heard this, I've certainly heard this, the who will look after you when you're old, which we kind of touched on with what your friend said about regrets and things. Who will look after you when you're old was the one sort of real looming specter of just like, yeah, actually, shit, like, I'm not going to have any connections with younger generation. Like, how is this going to work? You know, had been the one thing that, if anything was going to sort of push me to override my intuition on this, it would have been that. But you actually, I've got an Instagram post, which is probably I'll never post, because it's a little bit too in the camp of what we were talking about before, to reflect my true feelings on this, but I'll share it here. It's something along the lines of, you know, having a kid to look after you when you're old. What you're talking about is a nurse. That kind of vibe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
It's kind of like, it's unfair to have children with the express kind of idea that, well, you're my safety net for when I'm old. You're setting yourself up for no guarantees that your child is even going to survive you into old age, like, let alone be in a position to be able to support you in any kind of way when you need them. But anyway, I really came out of it feeling like my friends, you know, and I realized that part of my friends are going to support me necessarily, but my friends are going to be my connections. I've got really strong, wonderful friendships that I probably do take a bit for granted sometimes. Right. And if I'm thinking about little old lady me, I want to know that I've got that same level of connection with my friends. And so I came out of this book, given that I was also writing it during the pandemic, during kind of like years of social distancing and isolation, but just with a strong realization that my found family connections are as valid as my biological family connections, and that actually, because they're not biological, because there isn't that element of duty, I do have to actively invest in them. And so that's something that I'm working on and have come away from the book with personally.
Yeah, I have a setup already kind of planned out, and who knows if it will actually you know, come to light. But me and my mates, more than even just the people who live with me, a lot of us have been talking like in a very serious way about what we're going to do when we get old, and how we want to live together. And so we're planning on just like buying some land somewhere, and just like, apparently Ed Sheeran bought like a village with his mates, and it's colloquially called Sheeranville. I don't think he's a psychopath, he's actually called it that. But just like these little, where we could all build like little 1-story bungalows, so that we don't have to go down any stairs, that are really like manageable to live in, like right next door to each other, all live in a massive house together, all of one story, no stairs, or like amazing Stena lift. But
Elevators.
yeah,
Elevators.
Terrifying. But
Okay.
but we want to grow old together. And I was like, that's a lovely way. That's a like, that makes me feel warm and fuzzy, the idea of like just shitting myself with my friends as we get old together, literally shitting our pants together.
Literally.
But you know, like
changing each other's diapers.
Just the funniest, best people I know, all of us, like not having to do, because like spousal living is also really tricky, because what happens if something happens? You know, we saw that during the pandemic.
I'm fully prepared for my husband to die before I do. Yeah.
Why? What are you planning?
Oh, fully prepared. It's all mapped out.
All right, Jeffrey Dahmer.
No, he's 3 years older than me, and he's a man. So statistically, he will die before I do. And he's right. You know, I've been living with him for like more than half my life. It'll be like, I mean, I try not to think about it, but of course, it's the thing that keeps me awake at night.
100%. But I, like me and my mates, I'm just like, there's strength in numbers. Like we're going to live longer and we're going to live happier if we all live together. So I'm really working on my friendships at the moment and focusing on those friendships as I approach 40, because I really want to keep those going strong, because they are like, we will have a fucking riot if we grow really fucking old together.
We can figure shit out. Like we can figure hard stuff out together so much easier than we as individuals can figure hard stuff out. There's going to be shit. Some parts of getting older are going to be really hard. And if we have like really reliable, trusted friendships who we can call on, we'll get through it. We'll figure it out, you know?
Yeah, and they'll have family members come. Apparently, there are like studies on this because it's happening around the world, and apparently it like extends your lifespan and makes the chance of illness much less likely to live in like a communal space, not like a hospice, not necessarily like a hospice. Obviously, that like care homes can be great, but like a home where you are independent. Maybe there is a nurse who works there to just assist everyone in case anything goes wrong. But then when one of you's got like a family come to visit, then everyone gets that family visit rather than off in isolated ward rooms. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, there's an event, there's a big dinner happening, like the kids or grandchildren, it's like they come and then they go and then you're still together at the end. Anyway, we veered off into like my life plan, but I do think like unusual
this is like, you know, if you look at the news, oh, what are we going to do about this aging population? Don't worry, like the aging we'll figure it out. Just let us do our thing, you know. But yeah, I think conversations like this are actually really important, because it is a fear, you know, and it's one of the biggest fears when you don't have children, I think, or can be.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad to have met you. This book is excellent and people should go out and read it and follow your work. And I really resonate with you. And I'm really glad to see someone say it in a way that makes me feel like I'm not attacking my mates who are having kids, because like I think there was something toothy about me even on this podcast when I first used to talk about it. It would be like but I think I've changed, and as my friends are having children, it hasn't made me want children, but it's definitely like shifted my empathy and how I fucking talk about it, and how amazing and how challenging it is, and I just want to be there for them not for their kids. We've been very clear.
Well, you asked me what's come out of it, and like I said, you know, a lot of the early readers have been mums, and one of the most beautiful things to have come out of writing this book, it's the realization that this is a book that's equally for mothers, and that it can do that. Well, I was unsure if it was possible in a way to bridge this divide, because our lived experiences can be so different, you know, and there can be so much envy on both sides. You know, mothers might envy non-mothers' free time, non-mothers might envy the closeness that mothers have with their children. And I do feel that sometimes. Like, it's my nephew's birthday today, and my brother's very not kind of anti-social media, but he did this big content drop of like how adorable and cool my nephew is. And I had a bit of a like, and I'll never have that. I'll never have that with another human being, with a little human being that I made. Like, I won't. And I felt some sadness around that. And it was nice to just kind of, having been through the work of writing this book, to be able to actually acknowledge that that sadness is there, and that that's okay. It doesn't mean I made the wrong decision. It doesn't mean that that was the right life for me. But sometimes we will feel, well, it's okay not to get everything that you could possibly have or want, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing for you every single day of your life for the rest of your life. Yeah, you're brilliant. And I think you and I are just both about allowing people to give themselves the permission to live their lives as unusually as they please.
Yes. I love
fundamentally. Before you go, will you tell me, what do you weigh?
Oh, I mean, after writing this book, I feel a bit like I weigh the weight of the world, honestly. Like, I do think one of the reasons I'm not a parent is that I kind of care too much. I give a few too many fucks, actually. I can't help but sort of like not take on in a kind of activist way, but just like deeply absorb the weight of the world. And writing this book was really heavy at times, just to really acknowledge like how hard it is to be a parent and the conditions that make it so hard to be a parent.
For far too many people.
For far too many people. And yeah, so I've been feeling pretty heavy. So I'm looking forward to it being out in the world and for it to just kind of go off and do its thing, and to have a fabulous child-free vacation.
Yeah. You've been a joy. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you get lots of lovely feedback. I think you're doing really important work.
Thanks. It's been great talking to you.
Likewise.